Welcome back. In the first chapter, we examined Antonio Gramsci's strategy of cultural revolution, the long march through the institutions. Now I need to show you how this strategy is being weaponized right now through specific policies, particularly immigration, and why family and faith are the ultimate targets. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you understand the endgame, everything currently happening makes perfect sense. Let's start with perhaps the most explosive topic in Western politics, immigration. But I need you to understand this isn't about immigrants themselves. This is about how immigration policy is being weaponized as a tool of cultural transformation. Axel Kaiser identifies this precisely. Mass immigration without assimilation isn't a humanitarian policy. It's a revolutionary strategy. You're not helping refugees. You're re-importing voters who will support ever-expanding government power because they come from cultures where that's normal. Consider the pattern across Canada and Europe. Governments import millions of people from cultures with fundamentally different values regarding individual liberty, free speech, religious pluralism, and limited government. But unlike previous immigration waves, there's no expectation of assimilation. Instead, there's celebration of multiculturalism, the idea that all cultures are equal and equally valid. But here's the uncomfortable truth: all cultures are not equal when it comes to producing free, prosperous societies. Some cultures emphasize individual responsibility, private property, rule of law, and limited government. These are the cultures that built the West. Other cultures emphasize collective identity, government provision, tribal loyalty, and strong authority. These are the cultures many immigrants come from. Now, before you accuse me of racism or xenophobia, understand what I'm actually saying. This isn't about ethnicity or race. This is about values and political culture, and the evidence is overwhelming. Immigrants from Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, India, and Vietnam, cultures that value education, entrepreneurship, and family, integrate successfully and become net contributors. They share fundamental values about work, property, and personal responsibility, even if they come from different ethnic backgrounds. But mass immigration from cultures without liberal democratic traditions creates a voting bloc that supports policies fundamentally at odds with Western liberty, not because these people are bad, but because the political culture they experience taught them that government should control speech, that authorities should be obeyed without question, that individual rights are less important than collective harmony or religious law. And here's where it becomes a revolutionary strategy. Political parties on the left actively encourage this immigration specifically because it creates voters who will support expanding government power. It's not humanitarian compassion, it's strategic political calculation. Look at voting patterns in Canada and Europe. New immigrant communities vote overwhelmingly for parties that promise more government services, more speech restrictions, more government control. This isn't coincidence. This is predictable based on their cultural background. Political parties then become dependent on these votes, which means they cannot enforce assimilation or promote traditional Western values without losing their electoral base. So they double down on multiculturalism, on diversity ideology, on the idea that expecting immigrants to adopt Western values is cultural imperialism or racism. The result is a ratchet effect. Each wave of immigration creates more voters supporting cultural transformation. Those voters elect politicians who import more immigrants with similar values. Those politicians then cannot change course without losing power. The system becomes self-reinforcing. Canada is the clearest example. Justin Trudeau's government has imported record numbers of immigrants while simultaneously promoting ideology that attacks the very concept of Canadian national identity. The result: a country that is losing the cultural cohesion that made it free and prosperous in the first place. Now let's examine why family is the ultimate target of cultural revolution. Because once you understand this, everything else makes sense. The family is the fundamental competing authority to the state. Parents who raise their children with strong values, who teach them right from wrong, who instill work ethic and personal responsibility. These parents create citizens who don't need the state to manage their lives. Strong families are resistant to revolutionary ideology. Children raised in stable, two-parent homes with clear moral teaching don't see themselves as victims. They don't demand that government solve all their problems. They're psychologically resilient and culturally conservative regardless of their political views. This is why every totalitarian regime in history has attacked the family. The Soviets encouraged children to report parents who expressed counter-revolutionary thoughts. The Nazis indoctrinated youth through state programs that competed with family authority. Mao's Cultural Revolution turned children against parents systematically. The current Cultural Revolution follows the same pattern, just more subtly. Sex education that introduces radical gender ideology to kindergarteners. Schools that affirm children's chosen gender identity without informing parents. Social services that investigate parents for abuse if they don't affirm a child's transgender identification. Drag queen story hour positioning men in hypersexualized costumes as appropriate role models for small children. Each of these policies serves the same purpose, establishing that the state, not parents, has ultimate authority over children's moral and ideological formation. Once that principle is accepted, the family ceases to be a competing authority and becomes merely a biological arrangement subject to state supervision and control. Canada has gone furthest down this path. Bill C-4 criminalizes any counseling that questions a person's self-declared gender identity. This means parents and therapists cannot even explore whether a child might be experiencing normal developmental confusion rather than genuine gender dysphoria. The state has declared that personal identity claims are absolute and cannot be questioned, even by parents, even when the person is a confused 14-year-old. The next step is already visible in Europe. Children being removed from families that refuse to affirm gender transition, the state claiming authority to override parental decisions on medical interventions. The complete subordination of family authority to state ideology. And this brings us to why faith, particularly Christianity, is the final target. Faith provides what Gramsci called pre-political authority. The idea that moral truth exists independent of political power. That there are principles higher than government, values more fundamental than law, truths that cannot be voted away or decreed out of existence. This is intolerable to cultural revolution. If people believe in transcendent truth, in divine moral law, in principles that supersede political authority, then the revolution cannot fully succeed. There will always be resistance. There will always be people saying we must obey God rather than men. Christianity is particularly problematic for revolutionaries because it specifically teaches individual moral responsibility, the dignity of the person, the importance of family, the legitimacy of private property, the sinfulness of envy, the necessity of forgiveness, and the limits on political authority. Every single one of these teachings directly contradicts revolutionary ideology, which is why Christianity must be marginalized, privatized, and eventually criminalized for any public expression. We're watching this happen in real time. Christian business owners forced to participate in ceremonies that violate their religious beliefs. Christian schools threatened with closure for maintaining traditional teaching. Christian adoption agencies shut down for refusing to place children with same-sex couples. Christians prosecuted for praying in public. The pattern is consistent. Faith is acceptable as a private hobby, like collecting stamps. But any public expression of traditional Christian teaching is redefined as harmful, hateful, or dangerous. In Canada and Europe, this has progressed to the point where quoting Bible verses can be prosecuted as hate speech, where Christian teachings on sexuality are classified as conversion therapy and criminalized, where expressing traditional Christian anthropology makes you unemployable in public sector jobs. This isn't accidental. This is the completion of Gramsci's Cultural Revolution, the elimination of competing authorities that could resist state power. Now let's look at where this leads, because we have examples. Venezuela and Cuba show us exactly what happens when family and faith are subordinated to state ideology. Venezuela under Chavismo actively undermined family stability through dependency programs that rewarded single parenthood and discouraged marriage. The state positioned itself as provider, protector, and ultimate authority. When families depend on government for survival, they cannot resist government power. Cuba went even further. The Committees for the Defense of the Revolution monitor every neighborhood, every apartment building. Neighbors inform on neighbors, children report parents. Religious practice is controlled and monitored. Family bonds are deliberately weakened to strengthen state control. The result in both cases: collapse, economic devastation, social breakdown, mass emigration. Because societies where family and faith are destroyed lose the social capital that makes cooperation, trust, and prosperity possible. Humans are atomized individuals. We're social beings who need strong families, tight communities, and transcendent purpose. When you destroy these things in the name of liberation, you don't create freedom. You create dependency, alienation, and ultimately tyranny. So what's the alternative? What stops this cultural revolution? The answer is the same things that built Western civilization in the first place: strong families raising children with clear values, faith communities that maintain transcendent truth, individuals who refuse to comply with ideological demands, people who say no, this is wrong, and I won't participate. This requires courage, because the cost of resistance keeps increasing. You might lose your job. You might be socially ostracized. You might face legal prosecution, but the cost of surrender is civilization itself. Axel Kaiser puts it starkly: the choice is binary. Either you defend the values that make freedom possible, family, faith, truth, individual rights, or you watch those values get systematically destroyed and replaced with collectivist ideology that always ends in poverty and oppression. There is no middle ground. There is no compromise that preserves freedom while surrendering its foundations. Let me end with this. Gramsci wrote that the revolution would create a period of monsters, the transition between the old world dying and the new world being born. We're in that period now. The old world of Western liberty, stable families, shared truth, and limited government is dying. The new world of state control, fractured identity, relativism, and unlimited government power is being born, but the outcome isn't predetermined. Revolutions succeed only when good people do nothing, when they comply out of fear, when they prioritize comfort over conviction. Venezuela fell because people traded liberty for promises of equality. Cuba fell because people believed revolutionary rhetoric over historical wisdom. Europe is falling because people abandoned the faith and family structures that made it strong. Canada is falling because people value politeness more than truth. The United States stands at the precipice. The same forces are at work, the same institutions are captured, the same cultural revolution is advancing, but Americans have something unique: a cultural memory of liberty, a constitutional structure that, if defended, can resist tyranny, and a tradition of rebellion against unjust authority. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video, because the revolution succeeds in darkness. It fails when exposed to light, and the first step to resistance is understanding exactly what we're resisting and why it matters. The revolution didn't end with the Berlin Wall. It moved into the classroom, the newsroom, the courtroom, and the corporate boardroom. It weaponized compassion, tolerance, and inclusion as tools to dismantle the very civilization that made those values possible, but it hasn't won yet. And it won't win if we refuse to surrender. Protect your family. Keep your faith, speak the truth, resist the lies. Because everything depends on what we do right now, in this moment, in this generation. The silent takeover only succeeds if we remain silent. So speak, while you still can.